I can't work with anyone anymore. Even meeting you at the station today, there's always a thought in my mind saying, is this guy who he says he is? Unilad, the Ladbible. If I had known that they would turn into the 2 largest social media brands in the world, and I would later nearly die as a result of the pressure caused by what happened next, I might have thought twice about starting them at all. In 2010, I started Unilad, and I was just obsessed with it. And I recreated that 2 years later with Ladbible when Unilad got taken from me. There's a strong argument to say that was the beginning of a genuine crisis. Lots of drink, a couple of hospital visits. I pretty much nearly got arrested once. I got to the point where I couldn't walk. I went into a hospital and they had no idea what it was. I flew back to England pretty much straight away, and the doctor said, you're lucky that you saw me, because I've only seen this condition once in my entire career. You've got...
Alex.
Hey.
This won't come as a surprise to you now, but I start all my podcasts with the exact same question, because usually it sets a certain tone for the rest of the conversation. And that question is, are you happy?
Gosh, what a start. I think so. I think I'm the happiest that I've ever been. And it's a difficult thing to define, I think, happiness. I think I've always thought of happiness as maybe the absence of sadness. I think if you chase a feeling, you can often be let down. Mm-hmm. And I think the reason I'm the happiest now, or I don't have sadness, or I don't have as much anxiety as I used to, is I think I've learned a tremendous amount about myself. Mm-hmm. I think I've got much more self-awareness now than I have ever done in the past. I know how my brain works. I've always struggled in the past with so many things like productivity, focus, communication with people, relationships. And that always gave me quite a lot of anxiety and I suppose sadness. And it's only recently, probably in the last sort of couple of years, that I've discovered that, or learned how my brain works. So I have answers to all these things, and I have coping mechanisms and ways to communicate better and to have better relationships. So I think my life has got considerably less unhappiness in it, which I guess is my definition of happiness. It's like the absence of sadness or anxiety.
I think a beautiful definition. Do you remember, was there something that brought about that change, in the sense that you wanted to start understanding your own emotions better, or your own brain, as you put it?
I started seeing loads of content on social media. People in the neurodiversity community speaking out about various conditions like autism and ADHD. And I recognized a lot of the symptoms in my own personality.
Okay.
So I just got obsessed with the idea that maybe that's an explanation as to why I haven't quite felt like I've been normal, which has always caused me quite a lot of distress over the years. I mean, going back ever since I was a kid, like I had kids coming up to me in the playground and saying things like, you could be normal or you could be one of the cool kids if you were just a little bit more not weird. So comments like that that's when you get kids and they're unfiltered, like they say stuff like that. So I've always thought maybe that's what adults are thinking as well. Yeah. That's always left me with quite a layer of anxiety.
Right. And you mentioned ADHD. If I'm not mistaken, you recently started going on a search for getting clinically diagnosed in regards to ADHD, right?
Yes, yeah, it's been super interesting. I mean, I'm not diagnosed yet.
No, but
I'll be very shocked if I'm not.
Yeah,
I've got my 2-hour video assessment on the 10th of December. So from now, that's about a week and a half away, which I'm super excited about. I've done all the questionnaires. But the questionnaires is a very long process, and you have to be brutally honest with your own self-awareness, and you have to really describe your strengths and weaknesses, which is a really vulnerable thing to do. Yeah. And it's such a long process as well. So for someone who might have ADHD, it requires a lot of focus. So there's a degree of irony.
Do you have to do it in one sitting, or can you that's at least something.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But what led me down that path was listening to people who have been diagnosed in that space. There's a few big people with large followings who I follow, and every video I watch of them is like looking in a mirror. Really bizarre. And the more I read up about ADHD and autism, I am more certain that I fit into that category.
Yeah.
And I think if I get my diagnosis and my suspicions are confirmed, then it will just add to my happiness, because that's the reason over the last year to 2 years that I've had less anxiety and less sadness, is that my understanding of how my brain works is developing.
Right.
So there's answers to why I'm potentially a little bit weird in various situations. But now I look back on things that I've done in my life, and I think that if my brain didn't work in the way it does, I don't think that I would have done certain things. So I think that it is, if you can harness it, which I probably have done at times, and other times I haven't done so well, but during the times I have harnessed it, I think I've actually done some stuff that I'm really proud of.
Does an example come to mind?
I've always been quite a loner. I've always isolated myself. I've always worked on my own, incredibly tensely, incredibly long hours. So when social media came about, I think in 2010, I started Unilad in my university bedroom, and I was just obsessed with it. My focus was like nothing I'd ever experienced before. I was just sat in my room at my desk for hours and hours and hours, for weeks, sleeping probably 5 hours a night. And I was just so hyper-focused on building Unilad.
Yeah.
And I recreated that 2 years later with Ladbible, the same kind of hyper-focus.
Yeah.
And I think if I was quote unquote normal and I was going out and I had friends and I wasn't hyper-focusing and so obsessed with social media, I don't think I would have done that.
It's fascinating to me how those differences, that's something I've seen repeatedly now. Often the things that make people a little bit different, such as having ADHD, how that often is actually the driver for their success. So that's fascinating to me. If that, obviously you're still waiting on getting it confirmed, but so another question or another sort of research hypothesis I have that I attempt to answer with this podcast is the research hypothesis that passion equals purpose. That's how I phrase it. What are your thoughts on that hypothesis?
Well, I think you mean passion, so something you genuinely, intrinsically like to do.
Correct.
If you can find a way to turn that into a business, then I think you're winning.
Yeah.
I stumbled across my passion and it turned into my purpose. My passion was, I think ultimately my passion was building communities on the internet. I think my passion is probably building communities. It just so happened because it was in the right time and the internet exists and social media exists. The landscape in which I was building communities was Facebook.
Yeah.
If it was 10 years later, it would probably be TikTok. But my passion 100% turned into my purpose. And I'm still doing it now. Now I'm just doing it on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
I've grown up, but my passion and purpose is still to grow communities. And now day to day, I do it on LinkedIn.
Yeah. That was exactly one of the reasons why I reached out to you, because you have a fascinatingly different approach to most as far as how you're building your community on LinkedIn. And one of the ways you're currently doing that is by calling out the hustle porn stars in particular.
Yeah.
I find that fascinating because it goes so counterintuitive to what the majority are doing. Why target this area? Why are you building your community around that message?
My aim is to call out a number of things. I started with hustle culture. I've moved on to various other things. And I think the reason it's landed so well and it's got so much support is no one's really been brave enough to do it, because don't have anything to lose. I've sold my 2 companies. I don't have a boss. I don't have a job to worry about losing. So I'm just passionately now calling out things that I consider to be toxic and unhealthy and really, really bad advice. So going back to the hustle culture, there's elements of hustle culture that I think are perfectly fine. I practice breathing techniques myself. I still get anxiety. Sometimes I wake up at 5 a.m. I like to run. It's the extreme end of hustle culture that I think is extremely toxic. Like the one that encourages you to only sleep 4 hours a night, and you have to run a marathon every day, and you have to jump in an ice bath, and you have to have a chai latte every day. You have to do all those things. Yeah. Otherwise, you're not successful. Yeah. And I think a lot of people look at that and laugh. But there are, and I know because I see it, there are a lot of young people who see that type of content, and they genuinely think that they have to do these things in order to be successful. And they get deeply anxious and deeply depressed if they wake up an hour late at 6 a.m. rather than 5, because they're now a failure. Yeah. So I think it's my responsibility to make content which is going against that and saying, actually, it's really unhealthy to only sleep 4 hours a night. Think of your future heart health. There's nothing wrong with just having a 9 to 5 for starters, by the way. I think a lot of kids nowadays think that you have to have scaled a multi-million-pound business by the time you're 25. Otherwise, no one's proud of you. I'm just trying to bring a little bit of balance to the messaging.
I couldn't agree more. I recently had a very fascinating conversation with she's also a friend, but the girlfriend of my best friend. And we spoke a little bit about my topic. And what was interesting to me is that she thought I also was very focused on this purpose thing, but her understanding of what that meant was like, indeed, as you say, you have to build a 25 million euro or pound empire by the time you are 25. Otherwise, you indeed are a loser. To which we had a lengthy discussion about the fact that purpose can also literally mean you taking care of your family, like 4 people. And if you do that really well, why can't that be your purpose? If you really love doing your job for whatever company as a 9 to 5, then indeed, why isn't that sufficient? So I think you are 100% right when it comes to calling this out and speaking on behalf of those people that otherwise would be too scared to do so. It's fascinating. I want to understand a little bit more about what led you to developing Unilad and Ladbible, actually. Like, what was the reasoning and the thought behind that?
I made Unilad. I made Unilad after a breakup. Okay. When I was at university, I was dating a girl, and she was the editor of a online magazine directed at sort of female university students. It was a comedy website with female content. To cut a long story short, we broke up, and it was my clever idea to think that if I started something that was similar, it might impress her and it might win her back. Right. So that's the genuine true story. I was heartbroken in my room and thinking, how do I win her back? Maybe this will impress her. So I thought I'd start it with, I'd direct it at male university students because hers was a female. I didn't want to step on her toes too much. But she actually liked it, and I speak to her now about it. I don't think either of us anticipated that it would develop and grow into sort of such a juggernaut that it is today.
What was the average, I guess, work week for you like there? Because I know obviously a little myself that developing content that consistently is hard. Like, was it even an ambition to make it sort of successful that you could sell it off, or did it just start out as a, like you said, hobby, and you were like, I'll see where this goes? Or
I had no intentions of scaling it, especially during the first year and a half. I had help, so I had two of my friends, Charlotte and Kate. Charlotte was an Oxford English University student, and Kate was an Oxford Brookes University student, English student, and they were very good at writing. Right. I preferred to do the marketing and the website building.
Right.
So quite often it was just me and Charlotte and Kay in my room, in my student house in Oxford, bashing out all of this content.
Yeah.
Writing all this content for Unilad. So the first year, there was 3 of us building and writing. So there wasn't a huge demand like there is now to have 6-7 articles every day.
Right.
Back then we were doing like 2 a week.
Right. Okay.
Because there wasn't the audience to want more at the time.
Fair. I read an article, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but that there were quite some tensions when selling Unilad. That you got out of the company and sort of had not on good terms. Is that correct?
No, 100%. I mean, it's in 2013. I brought in 2 other guys to help, and we were all going to do Unilad together.
Yeah.
And it was shortly after that I got kicked off the Facebook page, and back then, I mean, the Facebook page was and really still is the business.
Yeah.
So I got removed from the Facebook page. I really trusted these guys.
Yeah.
And I went home one night, logged onto Facebook, and I was looking at the Unilad page as if I wasn't an admin.
Yeah, yeah.
And I was just like, hang on, what's going on? I started this 5 years ago, and I go on here every day, and now I've been kicked out.
Yeah.
So I was calling them, messaging them, emailing them, what the hell is going on? And they completely ignored me. And I had to go to lawyers.
Yeah.
In the end. Which
you ended up winning.
Yeah, I went to lawyers, and they fought it as well.
Yeah.
And it took 4 years. We got to a huge 3-week trial in London.
Yeah.
Horrible experience. Absolutely horrible. Like I'm on the witness box getting cross-examined by their expensive lawyers trying to make me sound bad and a liar.
Yeah.
And it's horrible. But the judgment came through and I won everything. I won the company back.
Yeah.
They thought that I didn't have enough money to fight the legal fight.
Mm-hmm.
I found it and I won my company back. I mean, the whole 4 years was brutal for me. Like I pretty much turned into an alcoholic.
Yeah. Because of this?
Because of the stress. Yeah. The financial stress, the stress of just the whole legal process. I don't know if you've ever been in a...
luckily not. No.
I don't recommend it.
Please, I want to keep it that way, yeah.
But it was something I felt like I had to do because I had just had Unilad taken away from me. Something I started on my own, grew on my own, and it just got taken away from me. So I had to... That was my purpose for 4 years, was to win Unilad back. If I just left it and didn't bother fighting it, then I don't think I would have ever been happy.
Right.
I think that would have really always been on my mind. So I don't regret starting the legal process. I mean, I'm very happy that I did, but I wouldn't recommend it. It was very stressful. And there were some pretty horrible moments, like with alcohol.
I can imagine.
Lots of drink, a couple of hospital visits. I pretty much nearly got arrested once.
Well, why? Oh, because of alcohol being drunk?
Yeah. So there were a number of occasions where... So I drank a lot. Like I don't drink now.
Yeah.
But during the time, I didn't realize I was an alcoholic. I think the stress of the court case made me drink in a way that made me realize I was an alcoholic.
Yeah.
So now I'm very careful. But I didn't realize I was an alcoholic then. So I was going on 3-day benders, where I would just continuously drink without stop. And it led on to other things like drugs.
Right.
And that was my way to deal with the stress of the court case. And there were 2 occasions where I drank too much and an ambulance was called and I woke up in hospital on 2 occasions. And then I tried to run out of the hospital because I didn't want to be treated. I wanted to run out and go to the petrol station and buy another bottle of vodka, and the police like rugby tackled me to the floor. And the point is, I guess, is like the portrayal I was showing of myself on the internet during this time was very strong and confident and able, but behind the scenes, I was deeply troubled. But the trial finished, and there was like a 3-month wait to find out if I had won or lost. No drinking during that stage because the legal stress had stopped. Even though there was stress of why thinking about if I'd won or lost, I didn't have to deal with the confrontation.
Yeah.
And then my solicitor called me and he said, Alex, are you on your own? I said, yes, I'm on my own. And he said, you've won everything. And that was a moment I just dropped to my knees and burst into tears.
Can imagine.
So yeah, it was a horrible thing to go through.
Has that affected your trust in people at all?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I can't work with anyone anymore. Right. It's affected my trust in all sorts. Even whenever I meet someone new, for example, meeting you at the station today, there's always a thought in my mind saying, is this guy who he says he is? Is he here to really, is he going to secretly, is he here for another reason?
Yeah.
And it sounds ridiculous, but that's kind of my...
Doesn't at all. It doesn't. No, not even slightly.
But it's a genuine truth. So I always have this, it's not just a guard, it's like it's like chainmail.
Of course,
it's this unpractical shield that I have on all the time. And I've never been able to work with anyone since. I've had opportunities to go into business and do other projects with other people, but I wouldn't be able to. Yeah. The anxiety would come back, the stress would come back. There's probably two or three people I trust, close friends. And so the whole experience is really...
I think it's a very understandable survival mechanism, though. Do you think at all that having this ADHD confirmation that might settle that? Like, did you ever consider going into therapy because of that? Or did you even? Maybe that's a better question.
No, I've never done therapy. I'm finding recently that doing stuff like this is really helpful.
Okay.
I've done a lot of podcasts, a lot of public speaking. In fact, going back to the self-awareness thing, I think I've done a lot of public speaking on stages. I've done a TEDx talk. I've done probably 50 talks.
Yeah.
And I've never mentioned the alcoholism, the mental health side of it. I've always presented my story, and it's, I started Unilad, it got stolen from me, and I went to court and won it back. That was the narrative.
Yeah.
There wasn't any detail on the mental health struggles that I was experiencing behind the scenes.
Yeah.
And that was always a frustration for me. And I think that always created a level of anxiety because I knew I wasn't being completely honest.
Mm-hmm.
And I was considering these talks as therapy, but they really weren't because I wasn't being honest. I was missing out a hugely important part of the story. And now I go on stage and I say the details of how I started Unilad, and straight away I'm like, I'm an alcoholic. I'm deeply anxious.
Yeah.
And go on. And 90%, 80% is now talking about my mental health and how the whole process has affected me. And actually I find that as good as therapy. Yeah. I've never had therapy, so I can't compare, but it massively helps.
I completely understand. To some extent, this podcast is also a level of therapy for me, by speaking to others, especially as far as trying to understand that the experience I had or the experience I go through is very similar. Or at least there's a lot of people, and it's always slightly different because no one story is the same. So I can imagine that it helps. And from what I've seen on the response of some of your mental health topics, including another podcast I believe you did, it also helps others. So it's sort of double-edged sword would be the wrong metaphor in this sense, but they're both, it helps you, but it also helps others. Why do you think male mental health in particular is still not talked about enough?
I think there's still a long way to go before the definition of what a man should be changes. And I think a lot of men still struggle. And I think it will unfortunately be that way for a long time. I think there's still an expectation that men should be a certain way. They should be strong and be the providers and show, little emotion.
Yeah.
When in fact, I think actually to be a man is to have self-awareness. Mm-hmm. And that's the journey I've been on over the last 2 years. I think before that, I was trying to live up to the expectation of what I thought society valued in a man, which was to not show any of the stuff that I've been talking about, was to just keep that private, and it's not polite or it's not good to share that. But I think it's so dangerous to have that mindset. I mean, we look at the suicide rates of men, 3 times higher than women. And I think it's the responsibility of people who have a large following or companies and media to help change the narrative over how a man should present himself. And actually, it was International Men's Day recently. I think it was the 19th of November. And that's a new thing, and that's gaining traction. I think that's great because that's really shifting the narrative.
Yeah.
And what does it mean to be a man? And I think if you just stopped anyone on the street and you asked them, what does it mean to be a man? I think you'd get some very dangerous answers.
Probably.
They'd probably be honest. And I think that's actually the dangerous thing. And I think if a lot of men heard those answers, it would just reinforce that belief that they have to be a certain way and hide and not have a support network.
Have you experienced any of the whole Andrew Tate saga?
I've been watching it from the side bench. I haven't really commented on it. I mean, I think he is incredibly dangerous. Yeah, that's my opinion. I think he's kind of doing the opposite of the way it should be going. It should be going the other way. It should be challenging the stereotype of what a man should be, and he's pushing back. Yeah, into the toxic narrative.
I agree. What I do find fascinating, though, is that he's managed to build an insane following nonetheless. And I feel like actually one of the reasons why he built such a following on such a toxic message is because, ironically, for the same level that men feel like they aren't allowed to talk about their emotions. So I can very well imagine that there are a few men who feel like they are not allowed to be masculine, if that is a way to say it. And the definition of whatever masculinity is also still pulled out of context, I think. But ironically, I think it's the reason why he managed to gain such a following is because he speaks about men being men. It's just those followers misunderstand the context in what it means to be a man. So I've at least found it very interesting to watch from the sidelines how that has developed.
I think a lot of young men lack leadership. They lack a male authority figure in their life. Yeah. Maybe their father isn't that, or they just don't have a male. So I think Andrew Tate definitely filled a need. I think there's probably a lot of young men who saw his content and kind of felt like that's where they belong. That's the cult, that's the club that they belong in. Yeah. That's someone who they can look up to and call their leader. Yeah.
Or even like I could very well imagine that there's a bunch of people who indeed listen to that and are like, oh yeah, this is kind of how I feel, but not entirely. Like, but I'm gonna follow it because it's at least someone is saying something in the area of what I think.
I don't agree with most of what Andrew Tate says. I think he's a very good marketer. Yeah. In fact, I think probably I can't remember specifics, but there are a fair amount of things he said, which I think actually that's kind of makes sense.
Yeah, exactly.
But then he knows what he's doing. And then 10% of what he says is super controversial. Yeah. Like he'll talk about some horrendous advice that is just, not good. Yeah. And that's the clip that will go viral. And that's the clip that will get him new followers. And then he'll just maintain that followership by saying content that is still, I think, toxic, but it's not too controversial. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I think he's a very clever marketer, but I think now he's kind of been cancelled, but not. He's back, which I think I think he's more aware now of his responsibility. Yeah. He's kind of had a big slap on the wrist by the platforms.
Well, yes, but then at the same time, now being allowed back on Twitter, you could also argue that he's back stronger than ever.
He's definitely. I think the cancellation process just amplified his profile. Yeah. So he's probably quietly rubbing his hands together.
Yeah, but exactly.
I think he'll probably mature a lot in his content. I've seen lots of interviews with him, with Piers Morgan and others. And exactly. You can kind of tell he's backtracking a bit on his more controversial comments. Yeah. So I think he knows he probably went a bit too far. Yeah. But now he's got the notoriety and the fame. He doesn't need to be controversial anymore. He can scale it back a bit and just be a bit more reasoned with what he's saying. Yeah. So it'll be interesting. I think he's going into boxing now to fight Jake Paul. So it'll be interesting to see how that develops.
It's going to be a big one. So something else interesting I saw on your LinkedIn was that you, I think it was 2 years ago, managed to reach the summit of Mount Everest, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, no, I didn't quite get that far. In fact, I didn't. No, I went to base camp.
Sorry, fair enough. Base camp.
I'm very careful when I say base camp, because sometimes you say it and people think that you reached the summit of Everest, and there's completely different things.
Okay.
It was still a challenge.
Yeah, I bet.
It's still very fun. And it's something I will remember for the rest of my life. But no, it wasn't the summit, but it was a 3-week.
Still impressive. Yeah. But that particular achievement was of big importance to you. Why was that?
It was my friend who he lost a friend, and he wanted to do it in memory and to raise money for a cancer charity, because he lost a very good friend of his to cancer. And he wanted to get a team together, and he said, Alex, do you want to do this thing? We're trying to get 5 or 6 people together. And it was not something I'd ever thought of doing, flying to Nepal. I've got a tremendous fear of flying, and the whole expedition involves landing and taking off from Lucknow Airport, which is considered the most dangerous airport in the world. It's like 150 meters long on the edge of a mountain, and you're coming in on this little plane, which is probably overloaded with people. Absolutely terrifying, but an experience that I'll never forget. And when we got to Everest Base Camp after 3 weeks of trekking and sleeping in horrendous conditions, we pretty much just all just burst into tears. Yeah, it was really quite an emotional moment.
Because for you, it was also, or if, again, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe 6 months before, 6 months before that, you had arthritis.
Yes,
right?
Yeah. I was in Asia, so I was in India on it was meant to be like a 2-3 month trip. And about halfway through, my ankle started swelling up. Yeah. And I thought maybe I'd been bitten by something. So I just ignored it. But then my knee started swelling up. Got to the point where I couldn't walk. I went into a hospital and they had no idea what it was. I flew back to England pretty much straight away. And the doctor said, you're lucky that you saw me, because I've only seen this condition once in my entire career. You've got reactive arthritis. We need to run some tests to make sure, but this looks like reactive arthritis. And it's quite rare. It's quite common in my age group, but it's still very rare. Like my age group is the most common age group for it. And all of your joints just go completely stiff and they swell up with fluid and you really can't move. Like for the worst of it, I was in a wheelchair for a little while, and then I was just lying in bed for about 2 weeks. And eventually, after a heavy steroid treatment, I started to move again. Yeah. And I was very lucky because it can take a year or 2 years to recover. And I think I recovered in about 6 weeks, 2 months. So for that to happen, and then for me to get to Everest Base Camp, which obviously is a huge physical task, that was literally going from the lowest point of my life, which was in hospital, deeply depressed because the doctors were saying I was probably going to be in a wheelchair for 2 years, to arriving at Everest Base Camp within 6 months. I was just pinching myself. I couldn't believe it. It was such a feeling.
During that lowest point, did you also refer back to alcoholism or taking drugs?
No, not at all.
Why was that different?
Oh, because at that stage I had the self-awareness that if I drink, then I can't stop drinking. Right. And I knew I was an alcoholic at that stage. And I know what happens when I drink. I can't drink in moderation. If I, like a normal person, you can have a beer or two and then go to bed. If I drink, I will have a bottle of vodka and then probably other stuff. I have no control once I start. So it's super important that I don't have my first drink. That's always my number one rule. Right.
Why? I mean, besides sort of the obvious, you can't walk, like that in itself is incomprehensible. Were there any other reasons why you considered it your lowest point? Or was it literally just, or well, not just, that sounds so stupid, but you know what I mean? Was it because you were simply unable to move? Or?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a very physical guy. I like doing a lot of physical stuff. I run most days. I run marathons. I'm always doing physical stuff. Like I like cycling. And And when the doctor said I had reactive arthritis, I didn't really worry too much because I thought, this is 2022. We have cures for everything now. But then I went home and I was researching it, and it said the average recovery time is 1 to 2 years of not being able to move. And I thought, I'm 30 years old. And just that realization that I was probably going to not be able to do anything for maybe, even if it was 6 months, like that was really quite tough.
I can imagine. Fair enough. So obviously the podcast is called The Quarter Life Crisis. Would you say that you did have a quarter life crisis?
I think I did, but probably not a traditional one.
Okay, why not? Or what did yours look like? Maybe that's better.
Well, I would have been 24 when Unilad got taken from me. So I think there's a strong argument to say that was the beginning of a genuine crisis.
Of course.
That was the start of a 4-year legal battle that put me in a horrible situation.
Yeah.
If that didn't happen, then maybe I would have had a different crisis. Maybe I would have carried on building the business. And actually, in hindsight, now I have my self-awareness, I think that would have presented itself in different ways. Mm-hmm. It's an interesting one because when you're 25, 24, 26, chances are you've probably you've gone through all the stages that you think you have to go through to achieve what you want to achieve. If you want to be a doctor, if you want to be an accountant, by that stage, you've probably finished your education and you've done what you're achieving, what you're aiming to do. Mm-hmm. So then I think maybe a lot of people maybe have that what now moment. And I won't say his name, but I know a number of people who have really struggled with that. They've gone to university, they've got a top job in London, an amazing salary, everything they've worked for the last 15 years, their entire academic life, and has led up to this moment. And then they get that job and then they just feel completely lost. Yeah. And they sink into a feeling of, is this it? Mm-hmm. And I've seen a couple of people who have experienced that and completely fallen off the wagon, just completely disassociated themselves with the normal world. So I think it's a genuine thing. It's that time of your life where you're settled into what could potentially be your new normal for the next 20, 30 years. And sometimes people get there and they're very disappointed.
Yeah. One of the other main questions that come with the quarter life crisis question, as you already shortly mentioned, is this talk about paths. What path do I take? As someone who to some extent managed to figure out his paths, is there any advice you have as far as when you are trying to figure out what path to go, how to figure that out?
I think for me, it very much happened by accident. Mm-hmm. I was at a stage where I went to university because nothing was happening. And then when I was at university, I stumbled into social media, and that's kind of been what I've been doing. I think if you're lucky enough, I think you just need to try as many things as you can. Mm-hmm. There's a whole industry of people who are trying to sell this idea that you can find your purpose if you do this or you do that or you buy this course. I think you just have to try as many things as you can. Mm-hmm. And it's not easy. It's definitely not easy. I think it's a good time. Like we've got the internet, so the possibilities of researching things I don't think has never been easier than it is now. And try not to compare, I think. Yeah. That's probably the main one, which is way easier said than done.
Yeah.
Don't compare. Just put Instagram down for 5 minutes and just really, really focus on what intrinsically interests and motivates you. Yeah. Try not to do it. If you do something because you're trying to please your parents or you think this is what you should do for whatever reason, chances are you're not going to be happy and you're not going to complete it, or you're going to be miserable. And it takes a lot of experimentation to realize what intrinsically interests you. And by intrinsically, I obviously mean something that genuinely you're doing for you. Mm-hmm. You're not doing it to please anyone else.
Yeah. So you're someone that, as far as I understand, whenever chasing their passion goes all in. Are there any downsides to chasing your passion that you see?
Probably. I mean, I think you have to find balance.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm personally someone who doesn't necessarily see value in a load of connections. I've never really had a huge like friendship circle. I mean, if you can do it, if you can find your passion with someone else, like your girlfriend, or you have a friend and you kind of find that you have something in common, and I think that's amazing. But yeah, don't pursue your passion at the expense of something that actually might be giving you more meaning than your passion would.
At some point, you gave a talk for TEDx.
Yeah.
What was that experience like?
Really fun. Really fun. We had it was in Manchester at the Bridgewater Hall, about 3,000 people. It was actually the biggest talk I've ever done. And we had a tech rehearsal in the morning. You come on, you stand on the big red dot, and you look out at this empty auditorium. And that was the moment it hit.
Yeah.
And I was just thinking, wow, this is a big one.
Yeah.
But when you actually come out on the night and there's 3,000 people there, obviously you can't see anyone. You just see these big
lights on you.
really hot lights.
Yeah.
And the guy said, the director said, do you want auto cues? Do you want a memory prompt? Do you want your script to be flashing up on a screen? And I was like, no, it's fine. I've got this. And halfway through my talk, and I said no. And halfway through my talk, my mind just went blank.
Yeah.
And I watched the video back. And you can see the point where my eyes just fill with fear.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And there's like 5 seconds where I just sort of clap my hands. And thankfully it came back.
Yeah.
And I carry on.
Yeah.
And I watched that video back, and at that moment no one knows apart from me.
Yeah.
But there is a moment where I have no idea what to say next.
I can imagine.
But then luckily it comes back. I think I make up a sentence. I think like there's a connecting sentence that I just made up.
Yeah.
I say something like, isn't that interesting? And then it came back and I carried on with my script.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But I loved doing it. It was amazing. And it was, an honor to share that stage with some amazing people.
Did you ever struggle with imposter syndrome in the days leading up to that presentation?
I mean, definitely. And I don't really fully understand imposter syndrome. I think...
Me neither, to be honest. But
but it's something that is always... I guess I do, because if someone asks me to do a podcast or someone asks me to do something that I always think, are you sure you're asking the right person?
Mm-hmm.
Like last week, I got invited up to London to do a Netflix documentary on social media.
Mm-hmm.
The email came in, and obviously I said yes, because I'm just saying yes to everything at the moment. And my life's been amazing because of it.
Yeah.
But I'm on the train going to London, and I meet this film crew at the Victoria Station, and I'm thinking, there's so many more people who probably could have done this better.
Yeah.
But the day went really well. And they were really pleased, and actually I had a great time. So every time I do something, I get validation at the end of it that actually maybe I was the right person for that.
Yeah.
But even though the validation comes every time, it doesn't mean that next time there won't be that niggling feeling of, are you sure you've got the right person?
So has that then become less every time you do it, or is it always the same level of...
I think it depends on how much time passes in between each event.
Right.
So like during the pandemic, I didn't really get involved with the whole virtual talks, and I didn't do anything for about 2 years.
Right.
And then when I started on LinkedIn and I got my first invitation onto a podcast, I was really nervous. I thought, I'm not qualified. I'm not prepared for this. But I did it, and it went really well. And then I'm trying to do as much as I can. Now. And I find that if I take a pause and I stop doing public appearances or events or things for a period of time, then the imposter syndrome sneaks back, because I kind of forget about the validation that the previous one gave me.
Right. Fascinating. So I've now arrived at my last question. And that question is, what does the future hold for Alex?
What does the future hold? It's a really interesting question. And I think it's something that I'm struggling to answer myself. It is something I've thought about a lot, because I'm at that age where traditionally I probably should get married and have children. I have a dog.
Yeah.
So I've made the leap into some responsibility.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I have my girlfriend will probably listen to this, and we've been together for 3.5 years, so I'm at that age where I'm old enough now to see patterns in my behaviour and patterns in my life. So I think I'm at that crossroad where I either get married and have kids and settle down, or I don't, and I repeat the cycle of find something new, maybe it lasts for 3 years and then it comes to an end, and then I end up grey and alone.
Right.
So I think that's why a lot of men in their 30s and I genuinely think, just going serious for a second, I genuinely think that that's actually an explanation for this high suicide rate amongst men similar age to me, because you've got enough evidence from your lived experience to predict the future.
Right.
So I know, looking at my past, there's clear patterns in my behavior in terms of my relationship activity, my work activity. So I can pretty accurately forecast the future based on if I carry on and I don't make changes.
Yeah.
And for a lot of people, that can be the future doesn't look good if they think that the past is just going to repeat. Mm-hmm. So I think it will be I'll have to force myself into marriage and kids, and I think just jump in.
Yeah.
Maybe that's not instinctively what I want to do, but I know that if I don't do that, then
you have to try and break the cycle. Yeah.
And I can see where that will end.
Right.
So yeah, I think it's a good question. I don't know.
No one ever knows.
I don't know.
No, fair enough. Fascinating. It's been a fascinating conversation. I really appreciate your time. With that, I want to thank you once again.
Thank you, Ryan. No, really appreciate you coming down to Brighton and taking the time. Thank you very much.